All right, it's up. It's running.
Okay, so stand where you're going to stand and make sure you're in the shot.
That's why I'm afraid. That's why I think we might want to put it on the front row.
I think
you don't want to take up a chair, but I think that
I think you're fine. I mean, how you can see all the way to the door to all the way behind the computer.
Would be much better.
Look.
Do I have a roll anymore? No, because Aaron convinced me I should.
No, I'm not going to sit here. If you want to sit and monitor it, I want to
run the PowerPoint off of my own computer, and so now we're running the broadcast off of hers.
Okay, I think you're set to go, Adam.
Yeah, I think we're ready to go back. There's lots of room back there.
If you need us to just sing a little something, we can.
I know church people are the most punctual, right? We're gonna go back here.
I guess that's it.
We're gonna go back here.
So is now ready for this test?
Yeah, looks like it. Looks like this. Rain checkers. Oh, how do you yeah. Exactly. And speaking of let's up to what is going on with jazz. She was doing that. She got much better than she thought she would. She says they're all like, period. She said, oh, that's she said, oh, house and
Brian, could you come help me? Wait, it might have just been off, which could have been the reason that it was not working. Because it was just off. Yes, that's exactly what you need to do.
Good morning. Thank you.
That looked like interesting. That's great.
We had 35 singers and 25. That was pretty good.
It's so great to meet you. Thank you for coming out at this early hour.
Yeah, I was amazing. Oh, that's very well, I hope very sure.
First one.
Yeah,
When was the last time you were morning?
Go ahead.
Advertising,
I'm good.
$20.
My daughter.
It's almost like
Oh my God. It was more complicated than this. It's to do with education. This is our church.
I am so sorry, but I need to save these 4 seats for my committee. So I am just like, wow. July 17th at 8:30.
We're getting
Oh, we're taking a picture.
Yeah. So expensive. They're trying to figure out. Yeah, we have to buy a second one. Yeah, so we'll see. It doesn't cost a lot to have. So, yeah. Okay, we're sending
I
to
think,
first.
no, we're fine. Just gonna turn off the internet all together.
Good luck.
There we go. So maybe we should text Ethan and be like, we all know that you were just asking about. Oh, Dr. Bowers, I did save you seats up here if you want to. Good morning. How are you?
Is that Annie Mary over there?
That's Annie Berry and whoever else wants to join.
Hi, Annie Berry. So to my class, the 28 Little Happy Choral Summer MME, I'm not going to do my consulting on your DIS this morning at 10:30, but if you want my office left open for the Eichenberger digging, anybody want that? Anybody want to look at music today? Otherwise, I'm going to lock it up. Okay. Welcome, all of you that are here today. Dr. Darrow's on her way down, so I'm
Okay.
Oh, there she is. Okay. This is our culminating event in the life and times of those who do dissertations and leave that this year with a Ph.D. And today, Adam Potter is here to tell you all that he did and learned and contributed to the knowledge base of the universe. This is a 30-minute presentation so that you can share in all that he's done. And then we will quickly meet because there's actually another summer class in here. And the committee will go up to the KMU Lounge and do the actual defense. And then at that point you can say, hi, Dr. Potter, please welcome him.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm pretty overwhelmed by this many people on July 17th at 8:30 in the morning. That's a true test of friendship. So thank you. Or maybe you're just truly that fascinated in sensing systems in collegiate choral. But I really appreciate you being here. I also want to acknowledge my committee members, all four of whom have had such a profound influence on my time here at FSU. I'm just so grateful for the 3 years that I have had here in Tallahassee. They have been wonderful. And a special thanks to Dr. Bowers, who made sure that I saw this through to completion. Thank you, Dr. Bowers. So I want to begin this morning by talking about my reasons for pursuing this research in the first place. When I entered college, I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I was basically an illiterate musician. I was a pianist, and I was actually a really good, or so I thought, sight reader. But what I was actually doing is simply applying a manual reaction to those black dots on the page. I wasn't actually listening. I wasn't actually hearing. I was simply pressing the right button at the right time. And when it came time for me to sight sing, to actually prove that I could audiate or internally hear those black dots on the page, I was abysmal. You don't believe me. I was abysmal. And it was through the influence of a man named Brandon Johnson. He was my college choir conductor. And it was through his influence of teaching his choirs to sight sing in the choral rehearsal that I became a literate musician, able to decode musical notation into oral sound. And so my reason for pursuing this research is that a thing in collegiate choral curricula? Is that a common practice or an uncommon practice? As we're going to talk about, very little research had been done to answer those questions. And so I wanted to answer some of those questions for us. So let's review the literature. Sight singing lies at the center of multiple disciplines of research. And so drawing from the fields of music education, music theory, music research, lifelong music making, and choral music performance, we have the topic of sight singing at the center. It draws from all of those fields. And I want to talk about 4 main points today as sort of a cursory overview of the research that has been done to date. So the first point is that sight singing is crucial. It is universally acknowledged as a skill that is is really important for musicians at all levels. Eustace wrote that the most significant single test of a musician's ability is to be found in the manner in which he is able to decipher and bring to meaningful life, swiftly, accurately, and beautifully, the symbols used in the written language of music. That's point number one. Point number two is that although we acknowledge that the ability to decode musical notation is crucial for musicians at all levels, our instruction in those skills is inconsistent at best among all age groups. As Asmus wrote, it appears that we as a profession, we as music educators, have lost sight of one of the most important goals of a musical education: music reading. Building off of that, we have to admit that too many collegiate musicians graduate without the essential skills of music literacy, or the ability to read musical notation. Scott lamented the point that many professional choral musicians consider college-level sight reading to be of substandard quality. It is not unusual to find singers with fine voices, a command of languages, and excellent studio technique having difficulty singing a hymn or simple chorale at sight. The average college-level chorus often lacks the ability to read music at a level commensurate with their overall musical and vocal capabilities. And so that leads us to our final point, that a possible solution to that state of affairs is that poor sight singing can be remediated with the application of pedagogical systems that are widely used at other levels. So perhaps poor sight singing at the high school level can be addressed by pedagogical methods from the elementary school level, or perhaps poor sight singing at the college level can be remediated with those same pedagogical systems. As Giles wrote, the techniques developed by Karl Orff and Zoltan Kodály have had a profound effect on music educators around the world, but their techniques are limited to use by grade school teachers. Few choral directors have seen the possibilities or benefits of their use in a choral setting. If these techniques were used, undoubtedly more choirs would develop better oral and sight reading skills. As Kappers wrote, once the students reach the elective choral program, which is what we as collegiate choral conductors do, which is what most high school choral music educators do, once the students reach that level, teachers abandon what they see as elementary school approaches in favor of the more expedient, yet in the long run, less efficient approach of rote learning. This is powerful. Music learning stops, and singing, we might say mere singing, takes its place. And last but not least, if we're going to advocate for systems like Kodály at the collegiate level, at the high school level, at all levels of music education, let's see what philosophically that means for us. It must be clear that Kodály's view of musical training was much more populist than elitist at all levels. His main slogan was, after all, music belongs to everybody. The question remains, however, and this is a really important question, does the North American University Music Program have a similar responsibility to serve all of its students to the best of its ability, or only to serve the elite, who are able to decode the divergent approaches and obscurum per obscuris of our current theory programs? Do we continue, sadly, to turn out music graduates, a disturbingly high percentage of whom are, from the standpoint of oral skills, musically illiterate? Or do we strive to prepare the largest percentage of our students possible for the responsibilities of their musical world? That leads us to the research. That leads us to my reasons for pursuing this research. One of the things that struck me as astounding was that since all of those things that I've just said are true, or at least a lot of people believe them to be true, there must be scads of research on sight singing in the collegiate choral setting, right? Wrong. There is one study prior to today It was Myers' 2008 dissertation. It was on sight singing practices at undergraduate institutions in the 11 states of ACDA's Southern Division. As I'm going to talk about, the scope of my research was considerably broader. It was nationwide, and it encompassed both undergraduate and graduate choral programs. And I wanted to build upon this research so that we have an even more comprehensive look at sight singing systems in collegiate choral curricula. So how did I investigate that? Well, the first thing is that I needed to develop a subjects list. I chose to limit my study to collegiate choral conductors who are teaching at schools accredited by the National Association of Schools of Music. That is our country's national body for accrediting music departments, schools, departments, and colleges of music. On their website, they list their 657 members. So I went to 657 websites, college, department, school of music websites. I went to faculty lists, I went to choral ensemble pages, and in most cases I was able to find names and email addresses of the people who conducted choirs at those 657 schools. In some cases I would find the name, but not the email address, so I would have to consult the faculty directory of the main university. In some cases, they would list the name of the ensemble, but no conductor, in which case I would search and search. Anyway, this is a labor of love. I found 1,179 names and email addresses from those 657 member schools. I sent my survey, which I'm about to talk about in just a moment, to all those 1,179 email addresses. 88 of them bounced immediately. They were not good. So I determined my final population to be 1,091 conductors of collegiate choral ensembles at NASM accredited schools. And miraculously, 363 of those 1,091 said, I will give you some data, and I'm very grateful to those people. A second part of my dissertation was conducting interviews. One of the survey questions was, would you be willing to be contacted for a follow-up interview so that I can document your specific and unique practices in this area? And I had 54 people say, sure, give me a call. And 3 of those people were people I had cited in my review of literature, recognized authorities on this topic. So I said, well, there you are. You have some stuff to say. So this is the survey that I sent them, or the first page of the survey I sent them. The first question that popped up when they clicked on the link in the email was, which of the following best describes your approach to sight singing systems in your choral rehearsal? And participants could select, I do not use or very rarely use a system. I occasionally integrate a sight singing system into my rehearsals for specific purposes, or I frequently use a sight singing system as a key rehearsal tool. This is really important to note. If they answered, I do not use or very rarely use, I assumed that they were not very invested in this topic. And once they had selected that and clicked next, they got a page that said, thank you. There you go. So the remainder of my data come from people in these latter 2 categories, those who occasionally and those who frequently use a sight singing system. Here are those people. There were 227 total. There was no requirement to answer any question in order to move on. So for some of this demographic information, you'll see, for example, 2 people chose not to tell me what size school they were in, etc. But they came from 41 of the 49 states? No, there are 50 states. They came from 41 of the 50 states. They also came from the District of Columbia. They taught at a variety of institution sizes. This is the size of their music division and the size of their institution as a whole, their college or university. They had a variety of experience levels. These are the years that they taught in higher education. And I just love that 32 people who have been teaching in college, at the college level for 30 or more years, were still willing to help out this young whippersnapper with his research. The vast majority, almost 80% of the participants did hold a doctoral degree in music. So these are degreed, credentialed, competent people who are answering this survey. That was good to know. And here is what they tell us. The first research question I wanted to answer is, what share of collegiate choral conductors have adopted a systematic approach to music reading in their ensembles? This is that first question that I already showed you. And the answer is 31% of my respondents, I don't do that. Thank you. Good. Now we know. 38% said, I occasionally do that. And 31% said, I do that regularly. So that's an interesting symmetry to the data. That is not a statistically significant difference. This 38% or 137 responses is not significantly different than either of these responses. So we can say that roughly equivalent numbers of the collegiate choral conductor population have chosen those three approaches to getting music learned in their ensembles. The second research question that I asked is, what are the systems that you use? And the answer is an overwhelming preference for movable do solfege. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, depending on what key you are in. That is the and this is, as you can surmise, this is a very significant preference over everything else. Yes. So that is point number one. Point number two is, okay, well, that's what you do in major keys. What do you do in minor keys? Because there are some different options available for us there. Once again, the majority of respondents answered that they do la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. And then the second most popular answer was do, re, mi, fa, sol, le, te, do. When you remove just these two, though, this still remains a highly significant preference for La-based minor using movable do solfege. And then what is the rhythmic system that's preferred? An overwhelming preference for our old friend 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and the Robert Shaw system, which for my purposes I call instrumental counting, to differentiate it between other various verbal approaches. So some fascinating information. Now we know what collegiate choral conductors are doing, who occasionally or frequently integrate a sight singing system into their choral rehearsals. Research question 3, how much time is being spent on this kind of instruction? I asked this question only of those survey participants who answered in that third category, that they frequently use a sight singing system, because those who occasionally did would, the assumption is that their instruction is more sporadic and they couldn't answer this with too much certainty. So we see that at the beginning of the term, those conductors, those 100+ conductors, are providing sight singing instruction an average of over 3 days a week. At the middle of term, an average of about 2.5 days a week. And at the end of the term, a little less than 2 days a week. So this is a nearly perfect decline from beginning of term to end of term. And each of these represents a significant difference. A significant difference between beginning of term to middle term, between middle of term to end of term, and then naturally from beginning of term to end of term. And in those number of days per week, they also provide a certain number of minutes of instruction per rehearsal. And at the beginning of term, they estimated their time they spend on sight singing, which I also specified could be singing concert repertoire at sight, or singing concert repertoire using a system, syllables, numbers, etc. 26 minutes per rehearsal, 16 minutes per rehearsal, and just a little under 10 minutes per rehearsal. Again, each of these represents a statistically significant difference from the others. I found this a fascinating answer. These conductors are answering that they spend 10 minutes per rehearsal, even at the end of the term, we assume next to concert time, singing on syllables or numbers or using a system. That was very odd to me until I conducted an interview. One of my interview subjects said to me, Adam, I often, if the piece is just not locking into good intonation at the end of the semester, I will put that thing back on solfege, and it fixes it like that. So maybe there are more people like her out there who are finding that sight singing systems don't just serve the purpose of getting notes and rhythms learned. They also serve other musical purposes. The fourth research question is, all right, so you're doing this for a certain amount of time, what are you using to teach sight singing to your collegiate choristers? And the answer is choral literature being prepared for performance. This is actually quite a different response than we've gotten from the research on this topic that's been done at the middle and high school levels. And one of the possible reasons for that is that perhaps middle and high school choral music educators see sight singing as a separate entity. I spend my warm-up time, I do my 10 minutes of sight singing, and then we get into the music. And it looks like collegiate choral conductors integrate sight singing with the music. For them, the material of sight singing is the music of the concert. And so that's a significant answer there that we need to do a little bit more research on to see exactly how the time is being broken down and what the various approaches are. Some of the free responses that I received told me that while they may use movable do solfege predominantly for most musics, perhaps they use a different system for non-tonal musics. Perhaps they use a different system for polytonal musics. So again, all of these are really fascinating nuggets for us to keep digging into as the years go by and the research continues. Research question 5. All right, you're doing this. We know how you're doing it. We know what you're using to do it. We know how much time you're spending on it. Do you assess? Do you know whether your instruction is being effective? And 14% answered, yes, I assess. 44% said, sometimes I obsess. And I'm obsessed with this topic. And 43% said, nope, not for me. I teach it, but I don't test it. And the majority of people, the way that they assess, those people who do assess, do so in quartets, octets, or small groups in rehearsal. Although, look at this, 29 people said, I bring my kids in, and I have them sight sing for me. I thought that was fascinating. All right. Research question 6. What are the attitudes of collegiate choral conductors towards sight singing instruction? So I asked this series of 8 perceived benefits statements. And I asked people who frequently taught sight singing, what are the advantages of doing so? What are the advantages of using a systematic approach so frequently? And they had the option of answering 1, this thing that you said is not at all important, up to 7, this thing that you said is extremely important. Every single perceived benefit statement got above a 6. So there's no significant difference between any of these perceived benefits statements, which tells me, I'm just surmising, which tells me that the kind of people who systematically teach sight singing at this level and in this way, they probably have more than one reason for doing so. They probably have a very broadly based philosophical rationale for incorporating so much sight singing instruction into their choral rehearsals. They probably agree with all of these statements. So that is interesting to know. And then that was the perceived benefit statements. I then asked a series of attitudes statements. And this went to both those who frequently and those who occasionally use sight singing. And the thing that they agreed with the most strongly was that sight singing ability is an important skill for all collegiate choral singers. And the thing they agreed with the least strongly is that sight singing ability should be a prerequisite for all collegiate choral ensembles. you'll see that I did differentiate between all collegiate choral ensembles and auditioned collegiate choral ensembles. There was actually quite a strong agreement with sight singing being a prerequisite for auditioned ensembles, but there was a disagreement with it being a prerequisite for all of them. So are there differences between those who occasionally use and frequently use a system? Yes, there are. The strongest difference is that question about auditioned collegiate choral ensembles. Those who frequently use a system say, with less strength, yes, that should be a prerequisite. Whereas those who occasionally do have a significantly higher agreement with that statement. So this could mean that those who frequently use a system use it frequently because they can't audition out poor readers. That could be the reason for this discrepancy between those statements. And then the final two attitude statements, where students generally enjoy sight singing time. Those who frequently do so, well, of course, who wouldn't enjoy my brilliant instruction? And those who occasionally do say, well, no, I occasionally do it because they might not enjoy it so much. All right, research question 7. Oh, that's not a good sign. I might just have to talk at you, and I can do that. All right, let me just keep talking. So research question 7 was that asked, are there differences between the attitudes of collegiate choral conductors who have a degree in music education and collegiate choral conductors who do not have a degree in music education? And the reality is that yes, those of us who might be music educators at heart believe a little bit more strongly in sight singing. We especially believe more strongly in the perceived benefit statement that sight singing systems improve performances, which I find interesting, and the perceived benefit statement that sight singing instruction empowers students for lifelong learning. Those who do not have a music education degree, so let's call those performers for the sake of this morning, those performance-oriented people don't believe nearly as strongly in those two perceived benefits. And then the last question I asked, research question 8, was what are some of the unique practices? What are some of the unique practices that are going on? That's where those 3 interview subjects came in. And they were wonderful conversations with 3 experts in the field. And one of the I was really grateful with how that part of the study worked out, because there seemed to be 3 conductors who, while they believed in this, were on 3 very different places of the I do this frequently spectrum. One conductor was so invested in the idea of music literacy that she had her choirs do dictation. Wow. And then another conductor said, I do this with all of my ensembles. I do this with my masterworks chorale. I do this with my audition chamber singers. I do this with everyone not because I believe so strongly in the system, but because I believe that music should be auditorially based. I believe that it's really important that our students have the ability to internally hear the printed notation on the page. And then the third choral conductor that I interviewed, she said, you know, a lot of the music education philosophies are sound before sight, sound before sight, sound before sight. I actually really care about sight before sound. I want my students to be thinking theoretically. I want my students to be thinking, engaging their minds at the same time as they're engaging their voices. So that was a considerably different rationale for using systematic sight singing than the other 2 conductors had. So let's just very briefly talk about some professional implications of this study. First of all, I think that this study does argue for, at the collegiate level, greater integration between theory and choral curricula. I think it's unfortunate that there is not more transfer between those 2 areas of study. So that is one of my first professional implications. The other thing that I wonder is if our students might benefit if more conductors fell in that third category of systematically teaching sight singing to their ensembles. Here are the benefits of that. If you're teaching sight singing, if you're addressing sight singing in your collegiate choral ensemble, it means that you're not assuming that everyone comes to you able to read. And that seems to me a safe assumption, because they probably aren't all fluent sight singers. You're not assuming that everyone is getting that instruction elsewhere. Well, if you're all music majors, you have great oral skills classes, right? I hope so, but I don't know so. It also is serving as a powerful model. As I told you at the beginning, my collegiate choral conductor was such a powerful model of excellent pedagogy to me that when I was out there and I was teaching high school, I knew how to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, sequentially teaching music reading to my students. I'm not sure I would have known how to do that if I hadn't seen it in the collegiate choral setting, because I didn't have the luxury of sending my students off to oral skills class to learn how to read music. That was my job. And so I think that collegiate choral conductors can serve as a powerful model to empower our students with the skills of a fully literate musician. Thank you again.
Waiting. Would you please introduce your committee and let them slip out first?
Yes, of course. So we'll let Dr. Alice Ann Darrow, Dr. Andre Thomas, and Professor David Okerlund slip out first.
And then disperse because class is.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Tomorrow I'll put together an electronic version. Yeah, I want to remember I'll find it. They've traveled.